welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. I want to thank you for being with us today. I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Paige Gutheil. Dr. Paige is an osteopathic family physician, teacher, speaker, and founder of the industry-disrupting holistic healthcare collaborative, Signature Primary Care and Wellness. She's empowered and equipped thousands of women to stop feeling sick and tired of being sick and tired with her signature whole health tools and support systems. Focusing on those oh-so-tricky transition phases of life, she brings the best of modern science and the most natural and functional approaches to help women navigate bumps in their health path that are frustrating them. Whether it's teaching medical students to better care for all of us in the future, educating employers on what meaningful workplace wellness looks like for women, or sharing her own health hiccups to inspire her virtual community, Dr. Paige is known for her down-to-earth wisdom and even adding a little fun to medicine. Dr. Paige, so happy to have you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a fun conversation. I know it.
Absolutely. So today we are talking about women's health. We're talking about the concept of whole health. Before we dive into that, I would love to know a little bit about your backstory, Dr. Paige. Tell us about what led you to where you are today.
Yes, thank you. So, like a lot of physicians, I went to medical school just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just so excited to take care of patients. And I found myself training at an osteopathic medical school, and it just was so fun for me. An osteopathic training program is known to be more holistic and really encompass mind, body, spirit. And then, like a lot of us, we end up in jobs that are more system based. And we could talk all day about the healthcare system, but suffice it to say that it was just frustrating. It was frustrating not to be able to think about really holistic medicine. It was frustrating to only have 10 or 15 minutes with patients and have to deal with one thing at a time. And so, over the course of a lot of decisions and getting married and having babies and just trying to design a life that worked for me and a fulfilling career and having time for babies and all of that, I found myself splitting my time teaching primary care medical students, so I get my fix of those bright eyed, bushy tailed medical students and try to send them off on the right path. And then I have a private practice that works on what's called a direct primary care model. So rather than being sucked into the craziness of the healthcare system, I am so fortunate to get to spend more time with my patients and sit with them in counseling and talking about nutrition and fitness and mental health and life, because one of the principles that's formed my healthcare philosophy the most is that, we can talk a lot about all the fancy stuff, the biochemistry and our nerves and muscles and all of that, but it's really our life, our relationships, and our physical environment and our resources that has the opportunity to either be very uplifting to our health or frankly oppressive to our health. And so I found myself doing more, health coach training and functional medicine training and even life coach training so that I could lean more into guiding patients on both internal and external factors that affect their health. So that's how I spend my time.
Wow. And I want to just take a moment to recognize the shift that you made, because that's huge, right? Like, you go to school, you study to become a doctor thinking one thing, right? And then you get there and you realize, maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And so I think it's so important to recognize that you saw that and you were able to pivot, right? You were able to sort of pivot and create a new path and figure out what worked well, not just for you, but for the patients that you want to serve, is so powerful. Because I think oftentimes we get stuck there. We get stuck in the, well, this is just the way it is. This is how
it's supposed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than saying, no, there's another path here that I can take. So I think that's so incredibly powerful. It's not the traditional PCP practice. So I love that.
Yeah, it's not the traditional PCP practice, and you're right. Can now look back and tell the story
Mm-hmm.
in, 90 seconds, but as you look back and you may have encountered, I think we've all encountered similar
Yeah.
situations where it's like, you kind of know that you're meant to go in a certain way or that something is feeling uncomfortable, but it takes some time to kind
Mm-hmm.
of wrap your head around that and get the courage around that. And I got to the point when I was working in my previous practice, and I should add, my previous practice, I there were so many things that I loved about it. It honestly was a family business, and it was kind of the old-fashioned doctor's office where I worked with my dad and my mom ran the show, and I got to bring my young kids to work with me.
Oh,
So there's
wow.
so many beautiful things.
Sure.
Of course, that adds a layer of complexity when you're leaving a beautiful thing. But I got to the point where I honestly was very inspired by my wedding, and I felt like, you know what? I'm just throwing a party and I'm
Mhm.
creating this fun thing. I am creating this new thing. I sent out announcements to all my patients that were inspired by the wedding invitation. I won't go into all the details, but I was into it. Just knowing that I'm I'm expecting people to jump outside the box with me.
Yeah.
And like every venture, it's had its bumps and bruises along the way, but keeping some of those core principles of, medicine can be fun, wellness can be fun. We shouldn't feel like we're like restricting ourselves left and right or just, suffering our way through life. We can always, frequently, what I tell my patients is we want to work in two lanes. And so we can always be growing and investigating and what could be better and, what's wrong and doing all those fancy investigations. But at the same time, we have to fight for the positive, not to
Mhm.
sound, too frou-frou, but it's like we can be perfectly content and self-loving and um, gracious with our bodies and know that they're doing the best they can, while we also know that we're meant to grow. And I think of that all the time, both from a biochemical perspective and even just from a life lesson perspective,
Sure.
right? Like we can be content with wherever we are in life, but also know, hey, there's newer and better things out there for us.
Yeah, that's a powerful, powerful life lesson, right? It's both can be true. You
Yeah.
can hold space for both. You can be happy and grateful and content for where you are, but recognize that there's always opportunity and room to grow and
Yeah.
evolve, right?
I
So,
mean, it's kind of a mind bender, right? Like it's,
yeah,
but
yeah.
but I believe it.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the way you talk about women who are sick and tired of being sick and tired. It is so relatable. So I know you see it all in the work that you do, but I want to focus a little bit on women's health and specifically what are the most common challenges you see for women these days?
Yeah, for a long time, as a primary care doctor, I really pride myself in like helping all people and covering, being an expert in a lot of things. And frequently people, making conversations like, what kind of things do you see or what kind of things are most common? And
Yeah.
really kind of made reflect and tailor my practice in some ways because there are really common things that we see in our culture, specifically with women. And I've taken to if usually what I tell people is, oh yeah, there's a syndrome out there. It's called being stressed, tired, overwhelmed, overweight, and feeling older than we should.
Mm.
We haven't quite got the catchy name for that syndrome, but I think, all of us at some point can relate to those feelings. And I think that's when we're in that situation, oftentimes that's where the frustration with our healthcare philosophies come in. Because what I hear from women that are experiencing these symptoms, whether they're previously very healthy women or have dealt with chronic health issues, we can be at different stages, but they frequently hear things like, oh, everything's normal, your lab work looks good. And we just kind of have that knowing that like something's off, right? And so most of the time, women come to me having experienced some level of frustration, whether it's, the everything's normal, or they have some diagnoses and some issues that they know they need to work on, and traditional medicine doesn't feel right to them, or, they don't want to be taking, 5, 10 pills a day. And so, I really love kind of bringing together the best of both worlds. Like you can probably tell, our brains can be so black and white, and I just constantly find myself like, hey, let's play in the gray. As
Mhm.
uncomfortable as it is, that's where the magic is.
It's an incredible skill to have. And you're right, not everybody has that skill, right? A lot of us do see in that sort of black and white world. So I think it's very relatable. And I love what you said about knowing sort of when something feels off, right? Because our baseline might not be an average baseline. But I
Yeah.
think it's hard for us to know that, right? It's kind of like you grow up seeing the world the way you experience the world, not realizing that not everybody experiences the world that way. So I think it's the same thing, right? You think, well, maybe this is just the way I'm supposed to feel. This is just the way it is. And
Yeah.
that might not be true. And so I think it is getting curious and tapping into what doesn't feel right, because you are the expert on your body. And I can share from personal experience. I did go down the holistic medicine route. And I will admit in the beginning, I was a little hesitant because I was like,
Mhm.
this is a little woo woo. I don't know much about it. Right. And I'm very much rooted in science. And so, but what I realized is it's just a different way of practicing medicine. It's a different
Mhm.
philosophy. It's a different approach. And found out that I had adrenal fatigue, which is not something
Mhm.
that typical, primary care offices will get into. And so it's interesting. And so, learning that I wouldn't have known that otherwise, right? Because there's certain level of testing and treatment that goes into it. But it is good to know that, like, when you have that intuition or that feeling like maybe something's off, maybe, something
Mhm.
seems like it's not right, exploring that and not necessarily just accepting, oh, your labs are fine at face
Yeah.
value, right?
Yeah. And there are a lot of conditions and words that we use that traditional medicine is maybe a little bit behind on, or quite frankly, we just get caught up in semantics. The ones that come to mind are things like adrenal
Yep.
fatigue, nervous system
Yep.
regulation, hormone balance, estrogen dominance. There are so many words that when you approach a traditional physician with those words, they get uncomfortable, right? And going back to my osteopathic medical training, like that was first and foremost. I can explain all of those terms in very science-based ways.
Mhm.
They are real things.
Yeah.
It just so happens that sometimes we're not speaking the same language. So, but we really do want to bring the two worlds together, right? Like we're
Mhm.
not going to rub lavender on a bone sticking out of our skin, right? But we're not gonna take pharmaceutical medicine to treat the side effects of 5 other pharmaceutical medicine and go
Yeah.
down that rabbit hole. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we can play together.
Absolutely. I love that. Great point. So, a hot topic in women's health these days, especially for middle aged women, and we hear a lot about, is perimenopause. So, I would love to know from your perspective, just sort of baseline, like, what is it and what's your take on this trend?
Oh, I love that. I Someone actually told me like, "Oh, you're kind of hopping on the perimenopause trend." I'm like, "Oh my heavens, like perimenopause trend. We've been talking about this since medical school for one thing. And do we call it a trend or do we call it a movement, ladies?
Mm,
Like, come on now." When
mhm,
you really dive into the science and studies from decades ago that really influenced female health and hormone usage and how we approach perimenopause and menopause years, you can go down a rabbit hole. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of inequality there, quite frankly. The studies related to female health are lagging behind. And so thankfully, I think we are at a point where science is catching up with
Mhm.
what a lot of women have been telling us for years and years and years, related to menstrual health, perimenopause health, and menopause times. And so it's a movement that has been well overdue. But to get back to your question, just kind of what is perimenopause? There's a lot of terms that are thrown out there: menopause, perimenopause, postmenopausal, premenopausal, all those things. Menopause, like a lot of you may know, is kind of a date on the calendar. When once you have not had a menstrual cycle for 12 months, you can wave the menopause flag and say, okay, I'm in menopause. I tend to use the terms, menopause and postmenopausal pretty, interchangeably. That's just simply that date and time and after. Perimenopause, which really, in a lot of ways, is kind of governing the conversation quite a bit, is that somewhat rocky time, um, 7 to 10 years on average before that menopause date, where we know our hormone fluctuations are really changing. And I mentioned before balancing hormones. There's a lot of emphasis on how do we balance our hormones? How do we balance our hormones? And that is one of those terms where I think, well, I know what we mean, but I also always think about this graph that they arguably torture us with in medical school that plots out the four main hormones that are involved in the menstrual cycle: estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH. And if you look at that graph of the four hormones across about a month's time, right? It looks like four roller coasters superimposed on each other. So
Mm,
nothing is balanced about that picture. But
mhm.
I think the important conversation is, if we are cycling normally, we rock that roller coaster. We are very accustomed to that roller coaster. And then we enter this 10-ish years before menopause, and things start getting rocky. Very analogous to when things were just starting out in puberty and things were like kind of revving up a little rockily, right?
Mhm.
And so during that time, the roller coaster feels very different. It feels like it's stopping and starting. Sometimes we're stalled out at the top. It's not smooth. It's a little rusty, and so those erratic hormone fluctuations can cause symptoms in really every system in your body. There's estrogen receptors in every system in our body, so that's why the conversation is so broad. Because estrogen is not just about how we feel or our breast or our menstrual cycle. We're talking every part of our body.
Mhm. Wow, so interesting. And I know there's a big range in terms of ages, but on average, what would you say, and I know you said 7 to 10 years prior to menopause, what would you say is typical in terms of perimenopause symptoms?
Yeah, so the average menopause age right now is around 52, 53. So just, doing the math, we're
Mhm.
talking going into our early 40s. I was talking with a lady the other day, and we're kind of highlighting this conversation. And she goes, yes, oh my gosh, everybody told me, oh, just wait till you're 40. This and this is going to happen. And I turned 40 and I felt everything's cool. I'm rocking the 40s, right? And then I turned 43. And then everything started changing. And so truthfully, it can be frustrating because within that 10 years, um, there's really a bell curve related to,
Yeah,
when you'll start noticing symptoms. Some women start very early. I think more of a more common average would be around 46, 47,
mhm,
where those symptoms become noticeable.
sure.
But I have to put like a big disclaimer there, quite frankly, because think about all we're going through at this phase in life, right? And all of the symptoms associated with perimenopause that can be attributed to other things, and that sometimes can happen very gradually, or they happen 1 month and then we're fine for a few months and they
Mhm,
happen another month. And so it's very hard to kind of connect the dots. So many women, um, after it reaches a certain level and we're having a conversation and working on all of our health factors and maybe considering using hormone therapy, it's only kind of after that you look back and say, oh my goodness, now I can see the changes in energy. Now I can see the brain fog and trouble with focus. And now I can see even the changes in like dizziness and ear itching and palpitations and digestive health and achiness all over my body, not to mention night sweats. I mean, we could go down the whole list, but there are a lot, it really is a syndrome. We use the term syndrome of like this collection of symptoms that can affect every system in our bodies. And so we really need to be super intentional about connecting the dots.
It's a great point, because I think you're right. We are struggling with so many things simultaneously. And so sometimes it is hard to tease that apart. So I know you mentioned, a bunch of different things, but I would love to really touch upon what are the most common signs and symptoms. I think we typically, probably based on media and sort of movies we saw, like we think about the hot flashes
Yeah.
and the sweats. But tell us about what are the common signs and symptoms that you see.
Yeah, I think I sometimes say when I'm talking with women, kind of like the stereotypical menopause symptoms, and then there's like the sneaky menopause symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're right. Some of those stereotypical menopause symptoms of hot flashes and night sweats, and we see those depicted as very extreme.
Yeah.
I remember walking into my office and telling the gals that I work with, like, ladies, I think I'm having my first hot flash. Like, and I just felt flushed. I just felt like, I don't know, probably like I did in first grade when I was embarrassed and my cheeks got red,
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be super extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we do notice them more at night with the night sweats. Um, so that's a very kind of stereotypical picture that honestly sometimes comes fairly later. Some of the earlier symptoms, and again, it's different for everyone, but some of the earlier symptoms can be changes in the menstrual cycle. Maybe it shortens, maybe it becomes longer, maybe it becomes heavier, more painful. I think we underestimate the early brain related symptoms. For a lot of women, it's feeling more anxious, unable to wind down at night, trouble with their sleep pattern, um, trouble focusing, that brain fog term that you hear a lot, just trouble
Mm-hmm.
with word finding, or just not feeling like you're as motivated or focused as you're accustomed to, which is really disconcerting, right? And a lot of women take that very um, personally and carry a lot of shame with that. Um, Women with headaches can experience a difference in their headache pattern, whether migraine or other headache related. A lot of women start experiencing musculoskeletal symptoms, whether that's hip, frozen shoulder, or just achiness over all of our body that maybe we start thinking, oh gosh, maybe Aunt Betsy was right. Like it's just normal to get creaky when you get older. And it's like, no, it does not have to be that way. Gosh, what else? There are just so many symptoms that we come across. Skin-related symptoms, skin
Mm-hmm.
drying, itchiness, itchy ears, vertigo, more heartburn is associated with lower estrogen,
Mm-hmm.
palpitations. A lot of women end up in the cardiologist's office, very fearful because all of a sudden they're having palpitations out of the blue. And then that doesn't even touch on sexual health, decrease in libido, vaginal dryness, pain with sex,
Mm-hmm.
trouble reaching orgasm that you haven't encountered in the past. That all tends to be um, something that is it's very common and something that we don't talk enough about for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. And it really is a very broad, to your
Yeah,
point, spectrum
yeah.
of symptoms. But I guess it's important, right, to look for those changes, right? And yeah.
Changes. And I think, like I mentioned before, I used to function in a practice and in a healthcare system where we thought in terms of, okay, we only have so much time, so we're going to handle like one or two things at one time. Now, the beauty of what I do, which is so fun, is I get to usher women through self reflection and really dive into every symptom and say, let's dump everything on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it seems like, I don't know if this related, I don't know if it's this is a big
Mhm.
deal. Everything is a big deal. Put it out on the table. And then I get to kind of sort things out and say, okay, this could run together. We need to look into various things here. And so don't feel like you're alone to sort all of that out, right? Because it can be confusing, but also, know the limitations of your healthcare system and your, local PCP to say, hey, this is probably not going to be tackled in one visit, and it's not going to be one of those, where we're going in for a cold. And by the way, I want to talk about menopause too. It's going to take some time dedicated to sorting everything out.
I love the concept, and the visual that I got as you were talking is like me taking my giant purse and dumping it out on the table. Right? It's like dirty tissues, there's some lipstick, there's some fruit snacks in there, a bottle of water, right? Like my wallet. So
Yeah.
I love that, of taking like all the symptoms you're feeling as opposed to compartmentalizing it and say, okay, I'm going to save this for my primary care and this for my OBGYN, right? Start
Yeah.
looking at holistically. I think that's so incredibly powerful. So along those lines, talk to us about this concept of whole health and what it means to you and why it's so important.
Yeah, I tend to use the term whole health a lot. And in broad terms, we hear a lot about mind, body, spirit, and definitely whole health encompasses that. I think of our emotional health, our intellectual health. I think of our body structure and fitness. I think about our body, fancy biochemistry, what's our inflammation markers and enzymes and hormones and all of that. And then in terms of, but I've always honestly been frustrated by kind of like, oh, mind, body, spirit. Yes, mind, body, spirit, but what about your life? So I really call whole health like mind, body, spirit, and life. Because,
Mm-hmm.
like I mentioned before, oftentimes our first step to improve someone's health is not as internal as designing their environment and their time and conversations within relationships and resources to say, we need some wiggle room here. We need some space to focus on our health first. So that's one of the things I love ushering women through, because I think I've personally, had struggles with health and struggles with weight, and perimenopause surprised the hell out of me, even though I'm an expert in it. You're not immune to, struggles, even though you're an expert in a certain area. And I found myself kind of traversing that path of like, okay, I need to do this, this, and this. And the diet industry tells me this, and my, physician brain tells me this. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, this is a whole project, like multi-layered project.
Sure.
Where am I going to fit that in my life? I don't need to be like counting and micromanaging a whole separate project. Can it be easier than that? And can it, flow within my life better than that? And that's what I personally found. And that's what I, find with my patients. Our first step, honestly, is like, let's create some space here. Let's, take a deep breath and let's be really strategic about how we tackle things. Um, because there are every aspect of whole health is important, but there are some very foundational aspects of health that then when we take care of those and we put our efforts there, then the snowball can start rolling in the right direction and we can pick up some momentum.
That's great. And I love the concept of that holistic perspective, right? Mind, body, spirit, and life, right? Like everything else,
Yeah.
and incorporating all of that. Dr. Paige, we talk a lot about redefining success on this podcast.
Mm.
So I would love to know from your perspective, how do you define success, and how has that definition shifted or evolved for you over time?
I love that question. And the first thing that comes to my mind when it comes to success is this idea of really insourcing our life
Mm-hmm.
when we kind of stop looking to experts as the cure all and say, oh, I'm going to try this and I'm going to try that, I'm going to try this, but really stopping to self reflect and take a survey of what we want. And yes, we need, wise experts. That's my area of expertise. I don't want people feeling like they have to be an expert in medicine, but there's a subtle but profound difference in, having the confidence and ability to insource that wisdom and accept wise counsel, but feel like you're navigating your own unique path than feeling like you're grasping for external sources. So
Mhm.
my definition of success really has moved from that, let me try this, let me try that, let me try this, to
Mhm.
like, let me just sit for a minute and feel what alignment looks like for me and be confident in not keeping up with everybody else, but navigating my own path.
Your own unique journey. I love the concept of insourcing. That is such a beautiful way to consider it. And then being able to tap into the right experts to support
Yep.
you along that journey is so super powerful. And I can definitely relate to that because I feel like I have had the tendency of chasing the shiny new object,
Oh yeah,
right?
it's so tempting.
So
Where whatever the case may be, the new tech, the new
yeah,
diet, the new, like, it's
yeah,
so tempting.
yes, you want that quick fix.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you want our listeners to take away from today's episode or consider doing differently after listening to today's episode?
I would say, kind of along the same lines, know that you truly are your own best doctor. And you will know if you are working with someone who is in alignment with what health means to you and
Mhm.
is willing to support that. And
Mhm.
every relationship is, a give and take. You're not always going to find, the perfect marriage in a doctor physician relationship, but just know that you are your own best advocate for your health and make sure that you have a healthcare team that feels supportive and that you're not, for lack of a better term, like allowing those external pressures or other people to kind of dictate your best steps.
Mhm. Great advice and finding the right fit.
Yeah.
Dr. Paige, I want to thank you for being here. I want, your expertise, your insights are so incredibly valuable, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
Oh, thank you so much. So you can go to drpaige.com, drpaige.com. That has a lot of information, is linked to my practice website as well. I'm not the best at social. I love it, but I would love for you to hit me up on social. So on Instagram, I'm Dr. Paige Do, so dr.paige.do.
Perfect. And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram. On the homepage of my website, you can download your complimentary copy of From Chaos to Clarity, a 30-day journal for self-discovery and healing. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.